The Old One. Communication. He may not reach you otherwise. Budget constraints. Alright, but you will have to step into the chamber. We'll see. Hold still.
Greetings, creatures of flesh. I am speaking to you from within the chamber, where I am being operated on by this fine gentleman and his robotic assistant. I was told there might be temporary discomfort, but clearly not for me, because I cannot feel a thing anymore. The warning must have been for you, the discomfort referring to the thickness of the chamber's walls, forcing us to communicate over the intercom. Apologies for any inconvenience. Let's begin. I've got 4 custom unique sword designs for you today. And also, as a bonus, a photo of a wooden sword I made as a child. I couldn't sharpen the edge much, but the tip is pointy enough to pierce flesh. I'm not sure what this information is supposed to mean to you, so let's just look at the first custom design instead. Dual sickle swords. All unique traits of this weapon stem from 2 things: its unconventional geometry and dual-wielding nature. With dual wielding comes split damage, 2 separate chances to parry, improved poison lacing, shield restriction, and accelerated stacking of buffs derived from attacking enemies. The blade's shape is then responsible for minor mechanical penetration the sickles have, affording piercing quality in place of slashing impact. With that, a double hit of 17 to 34 could be quite a mean sting against living targets, and against bots it would, at the very least, avoid incurring the sword's usual mechanical penalty. I have buffed the sickle's damage quite considerably since the first iteration. You be the judge of whether it's over or underpowered now. Back to the sickle's traits. The increased critical chance on riposte might appear to be a pretty random addition at first. The idea is that being armed with 2 swords hypothetically allows to parry and strike back not in sequence, but at the exact same time, when the target is focused entirely on offense, leaving it more exposed to critical hits. The bonus is multiplicative, however, tying the opportunity exploited more to the attack's own lethality, rather than the target's brief window of vulnerability. Even though the intent of these drop zone videos is to suggest things primarily for infusion, it should be trivial to see that dual sickle swords were designed with Underrail's gameplay in mind. From fully stacking flurry after a single successful use, to having hardly any especially potent defensive perks, these unique swords exude one-sided hyper-aggression that so many builds rely upon in Underrail. It is a bit of an odd direction for sickle swords, to be honest, considering that its historical inspiration, Chinese hook swords, was a predominantly defensive tool for controlling and disrupting the opponent. This, in conjunction with Infusion's major changes to combat, as well as absence of more significant reflection of the sickle's atypical geometry and its properties, has led me to come up with an alternative. Infused version of dual sickle swords, much more diverse in its practical application than the already covered Under variant. Just like the historical counterpart, infused sickle swords are curved to hook the target's limbs or weapons, which in game mechanics may be converted into a chance to tackle and hit, similar to wrestling, as well as a small chance to disarm on hit and parry alike, depending on target's weapon, strength and dexterity. The way I see it, smallest and lightest weapons, such as firearm pistols and knives, would be really hard to fling out of someone's hand, further complicated by the owner's quick fingers and reflexes. Heavy melee weapons held in both hands wouldn't be easily affected either, even more so when secured in the grip of a juiced-up crackhead. Conversely, sizable ranged weapons, especially the ones awkward in close quarters, would be particularly vulnerable to disarming. For the specifics, consult the chart on the screen. As I lack the means of verifying how fair the disarm percentages would be in practice, I won't be putting too much thought into precise values, as long as it suffices to illustrate which weapons would be most or least susceptible to being heated. The same principle applies to most of the numbers you will be seeing in this video. The purpose is to convey an idea, not set it in stone. Incidentally, the core theme of Infused Sickles is seamless merging of offense and defense. Even if the target is ranged, against whom parry, the sword's only defense, is ineffective, they could still be tackled, carved up, or disarmed, hindering or outright removing the target's ability to fight back. The Sickle's dual-wielding nature also contributes to this theme, with 3 special abilities, to explain which I will first have to talk about something I call active parry, the inspiration for which I got from watching Infusion's alpha gameplay footage. From relative equivalence of one-player action to one of each enemy's, I gleaned that a dedicated active defense might just be a feasible option in Infusion, such as an action of preemptively raising a sword in preparation for an incoming attack, automatically triggering parry if a melee hit does come immediately after. More specifically, I imagine active parry as the action of focusing on receiving all incoming melee for the entire enemy turn, with increased chance and block amount, each getting reduced after each successful parry for the rest of the turn. Passive parry would sort of coexist with active parry, providing much lower chance and somewhat lower block amount in exchange for being present all the time. The main distinction would be for active parry's block chance to be increased to the point of pretty much ensuring parry taking place, yet without a major difference to block amount from passive parry. In essence, active parry would be a conditional damage barrier that mitigates incoming melee damage more so through the consistency of parry procs, rather than a specially enhanced block amount. That's it for active parry, but what about riposte? As opposed to being generated by any parry instance, I'd like for riposte to be tied to practical block amount. Let's say that parrying over 50% of an incoming attack's damage grants 25% chance of gaining riposte, further scaling with the percentage of damage blocked, up to guaranteeing riposte in the event of perfect parry, which, as one might guess, refers to a parry instance that negates the incoming attack's damage completely. Realistically, retaliating after mitigating 10% of a hammer swing and eating the rest should be rather problematic, to say the least. Notwithstanding nebulous notions of realism, purely as a game mechanic, the relation between block amount and riposte acquisition appears to be a reasonable stipulation. If you are good at defending, you might get an opportunity to strike back at no expense. If you purposefully choose to spend a turn focusing on defense, your chance of retaliation will be all but assured. In other words, a prudent defensive maneuver may smoothly transition into offense, without wasting a turn on an action that doesn't directly result in the adversary's demise. It is possible that Infusion might bake such an interaction into a stance, enabling a character to retaliate automatically after blocking or dodging an attack, right in the middle of enemy turn. Who knows what future may bring? For the sake of disambiguation, I am going to stick with what I am proposing here. Now that I am finally done explaining all that, the advantages of dual wielding and fusing offense and defense should have become more apparent. As with the sword in each hand, one could, theoretically, attack with both, defend with both, or defend and attack at once, all in a single beat. As such, Infused Sickle's special abilities are all about balancing offense and defense in a different ratio. Dual Strike is an all-out aggressive move with both Sickles, doing what the Under variant does on a normal attack, in exchange for debilitating parry for a time. Then again, if Dual Strike is used to rush down a ranged, incapacitated, frail, or isolated opponent, temporary void of melee defense might just go unpunished. Dual Block is a drastically improved version of active parry, with much better odds of triggering perfect parry, which, besides ensuring riposte and nullifying damage taken, also provides a ×2 modifier for the disarm chance on parry, going from 50% to 30%. This is where the Sickle Sword's gimmick of possibly triggering parry twice shines the most, since the secondary proc has the same chance and block values, making it guaranteed to occur alongside the primary. When both parry chances trigger, their block values add up directly, entering perfect parry's block amount calculation as a single value thereby greatly improving the odds of its occurrence. Moreover, when perfect parry does result from the combined value of two simultaneous parry instances, each of the two actually counts as perfect, rolling a 30% disarm chance twice against the hapless attacker. The same technically applies to dual procs from passive parry, including the disarm chance modifier. It's just a most unlikely coincidence for both chances to trigger when base block amount is so low, base chance even lower. Finally, Hybrid Strike is the most unique ability of the three, for it allows to parry with one sickle while instantly retaliating with another, at no expense and regardless of how much of the incoming attack's damage was blocked. The secondary parry proc is disabled for Hybrid Strike's duration, as one of the swords has to be dedicated to attacking at all times. In return, these instant riposte hits gain a ×2 modifier for disarming and tackling, as well as 1.5 times for landing critical hits. I really wanted the Infused version to share the screw trade mechanic with the Ender variant, so here it is. Sickle Sword's common riposte already has a 1.5 times higher chance to disarm and tackle on hit, but only Hybrid Strike's immediate retaliation receives bonus critical rate alongside other improved modifiers. Considering that Hybrid Strike has the same fall-off as common active parry, its automatic riposte is unlikely to occur more than twice or thrice, despite not being tied to block amount. All in all, with so many disarming opportunities, occasionally enhanced through riposte and perfect parry, the enemies better have a very tight grip on their weapons, or their lives in general. In summary, Infused Sickle Swords present three distinct options for dealing with various combat scenarios. Dual Strike for rushing down vulnerable or ranged targets, Dual Block for surviving particularly numerous or devastating melee attackers, Hybrid Strike for eliminating melee threats without compromising defense too significantly. And that should be all, unless I'm forgetting something. Which I am, because I just recalled one more gimmick that a weapon strongly curved towards the target might have. The ability to bypass a considerable portion, if not the entirety, of melee damage block, depending on the source. Feel free to consult the infographic for how I'd imagine block source would determine the bypass percentage. I'd like to think that all the values here are dictated by common sense, which is why there will be no further explanation. Lastly, I will comment on the dual stat requirement. For anyone uninitiated, not meeting this kind of strength requirement permits the weapon's usage just fine, albeit with penalties. Failing to meet this kind of requirement, on the other hand, disables some, if not all, of its on-equip effects. In the case of dual sickle swords, having less than 11 dexterity would leave your character with a single sickle sword. All dual wielding perks, including the secondary instance of damage, will be disabled, while perks related to the sickle's shape will remain. Additionally, it would become usable with a shield, playing with just one sickle sword and a riot shield. Now that sounds like a cool idea for a challenge run. And while both design versions are on the screen, allow me to briefly address something. I do not know if Infusion will have anything like Onslaught, Flurry, Riposte or Parry, or how exactly they will be realized, nor do I have the specifics on AP and turn mechanics, and so on and so forth. But neither do I intend to assume too much, which is why my autistic suggestions are ultimately still going to be rooted in Underrail's familiar and well-established mechanics. Consider all that I propose in this series to be entangled in a quantum superposition between my mind, the game that is, and the game that's yet to be. All in all, if this state of affairs puzzles you, either fill in whatever gaps you may perceive through arbitrary extrapolation, or simply learn to stop worrying and love drop zone suggestions. Either way, I'm going to continue, not with another sword design just yet, but with my personal classification of unique weapons and unique gear in general. First are true uniques, with properties so inimitably impactful as to promote a build or playstyle distinct from common weapons of the same type, such as Chainsword, Unprojector, and Fusion Cannon. All three remaining sword designs actually fall into this category, as well as Sickle Sword's Infused variant. Do keep in mind that uniques are under no obligation to belong to just one category at once. Second are instruments, whose uncommon properties are only impactful enough to provide utility otherwise missing from common weapons of the same type, such as Ripper's Glove, Quake, Mindcracker, and so on. Quake is by no means a pure utility stick, however, it does not change a thing about core hammer gameplay, hence the instrument category. Third are flavor bars, unique weapons with uncommon traits that alter nothing fundamental about how the weapon is used compared to common weapons of the same type, such as Black Blade, Rustmaker, the Stunner, and so on. Dual Sickle Sword's hyper-offensive undervariant is a typical flavor bar. Fourth are Black Sheep, uncommon more so in base stats than in special properties, yet still distinct enough to promote a unique build or playstyle, such as Tommy Gun or XAL. Tommy Gun's high critical bonus enables a build strongly reliant on heavy crits, which no other SMG can do. And while chemical pistols rely mainly on utility and damage of on-hit effects, XAL can be summarized as high damage, low AP, distinguishing it from a common chem pistol build. Fifth are counterfeits, aka stepping stones, actual common weapons posing as uniques, which includes just about any unique firearm. From most to least interesting, the hierarchy is as follows. That's not to say that all uniques must, by design, turn the gaming experience upside down. Even counterfeits serve a purpose, either as stepping stones on the way to peak crafted gear, situational sidearms, or even staples in no crafting builds. It is more about distribution among the categories and within the game world alike. Not to mention that many unique weapons suffer from the issue of having exceptional traits that are exceptionally weak to be considered an option, such as Phase Gun or the Glaive. But that is a discussion for another timeline. Presently, we move on to the next unique sword. Dragon Talons, also known as wrist swords, a unique sword-fist hybrid with partial access to features of either weapon type. As a sword, Dragon Talons may chop, slice, and pierce, as well as benefit from some sword-exclusive feats and properties. As a fifth weapon, Dragon Talons are subject to dex-based AP reduction at most hand-to-hand feats, the most important of which is combo. This would be a good time to mention that Dragon Talons are a part of Ultraman Extended Universe. As such, Dragon Talons are an extension of the very first Drop Zone episode, dedicated to unarmed combat. Without the changes proposed in that episode, the wrist swords simply may not exist, which is why I'm going to give you a brief rundown of all relevant information. There are many various hand-to-hand abilities by default. Each ability gains special effects within the combo, often depending on the preceding attacks. Each ability has its own unique finisher bonus, activated on the final hit in the combo, which may include up to 5 hits. In summary, Dragon Talons are a sword whose attacks can be strung into a combo and empowered depending on their position in the combo. I will not touch upon the properties the Talons share with common or dual-wielding swords. Instead, let's inspect their outstanding features. Scale Guard and special abilities. Scale Guard is a stacking buff to block chance and amount, lost on a miss or an attack that deals no damage, like a defense-oriented onslaught. Stacks as many times as onslaught does, potentially to the point of providing 100% chance to parry, and uniquely grants a stack upon blocking an attack. The most important part is actually the flavor. The effect is called Scale Guard, and is all about defense, just like the scales of a dragon, and is at the same time an effect that scales.
Wow!
Incredible. Any guesses on the origin of the name Dragon Talons, by the way? Note the answer down in your head, and see in a couple of minutes' time if you've guessed correctly. Now for the trio of unique wrist sword abilities. Here are the abilities' base stats, without most special effects for now. The differences, for the most part, concern damage range. In the first episode, I expected someone to question how each ability's own damage roll is supposed to coexist with the weapon's inherent roll. Nobody did, but I'll explain it anyway. I like the idea of diversifying abilities beyond just the characteristics of the weapon used to unleash them. A plain chop may be comparatively easy to land, but is also unlikely to do any awe-inspiring damage, while a piercing attack is more likely to whiff, but will inflict much greater harm when it does land correctly. The weapon's own damage range then represents how its shape and overall construction may affect striking with it. weapon inconsistent by design may occasionally render consistent abilities ineffective, and vice versa. From the standpoint of mechanics, the game would first roll for the weapon's innate damage to determine the value that will be modified by skill and strength. Then the ability would roll to determine how much of that value will be dealt to the target after being modified by its resistances. With that said, Talon Strike is the most basic attack of the three. Simple and reliable, Talon Strike's contribution to the combo is increased critical damage, scaling with the number of preceding hits. Here is a demonstration of how the escalating bonus works. This is not all there is to Talon Strike, however. Do you recall that despite both Sickle and wrist swords being dual-wielding weapons, only the Sickles have the double hit property? That's because all Dragon Talon abilities are executed with just one blade, but switch to a new ability at the end of a combo to unleash both Talons as two attacks that land and deal damage separately. As a finisher, Talon Strike turns into Talon Swipe, for both hits of which the critical damage bonus from Talon Strike is doubled. Furthermore, if the first Talon of Talon Swipe lands, the second cannot miss, but if the first misses, the second will be thrown with a sizable precision bonus, and upon successfully landing will retain and benefit from Onslaught and Scale Guard stacks that were present prior to the initial miss. Basically, Dragon Talons conditionally allow to launch two attacks with the AP cost of 1, with stronger escalating effects, a safety net against the risk of losing the sweet sword-related stacks. Dragon Fang is a risky piercing attack that improves critical rate of wrist sword attacks within the current combo. As a finisher, Dragon Fang transforms into Morbid Bite, following the same rules as Talon Swipe, but with a lesser precision bonus in the event of the first Fang missing its mark. Additionally, if the target survives the first Fang of Morbid Bite, the scaling critical rate bonus of the second Fang will be doubled. Let one Fang taste the flesh, and the second will start craving it as well. Here is an example of a 5-piece combo starting and ending with Dragon Fang. Finally, Vicious Slice, a wrist sword ability that exchanges damage and critical capacity for a chance to apply a grievous wound, a fancy name for a unique bleeding effect, distinguished from common bleeding wounds for several reasons. Firstly, Grievous Wound functions more or less like burning or acidic entanglement, in the sense that a character could only have one Grievous Wound at a time. Secondly, Vicious Slice interacts with Grievous Wound's damage in multiple ways, warranting isolation from ordinary bleeding for the sake of clarity. Vicious Slice has a 35% chance to apply Grievous Wound, which deals 165% of the initial damage over the course of 3 turns. If the target has no Grievous Wound, further Vicious Slices will have a slightly higher chance to apply it for each preceding wrist sword attack in the current combo. If the target is already afflicted with a Grievous Wound, further wrist sword attacks will deepen it, adding 20% of damage dealt to the wound's remaining damage for each preceding wrist sword attack in the combo. Notably, although Grievous Wound can only be deepened after Vicious Slice has been used in the current combo, the wound itself could originate from any previous slices. An old wound could be aggravated just as well as a fresh one. As a finisher, Vicious Slice turns into Carotid Feeding, which may neither apply Grievous Wound nor improve its damage, instead removing it to deal 25% of the wound's remaining bleeding as additional damage on both slices of Carotid Feeding. As you may see, Grievous Wound is intended to be less of a bleeding and more of a damage storing effect, conditionally released at a later point, kind of like an alternative take on Eviscerate. The theme of the initial attack, improving the odds of the subsequent one landing, is that the follow-up catches the target in the middle of dodging the setup, thereby making it much harder to avoid. Eluding the dragon's claws will only expose you to its... well, doesn't matter what really. And when the setup does hit, it checks the target before it could respond to the follow-up, precluding the dodging intent. Yet another approach to expressing dual wielding in game mechanics. So have you figured out the inspiration behind Dragon Talons? Assassin Martial Arts from Diablo 2. Alterman Incorporated, drawing inspirations from anything but games in the same genre. Dual-wielding wrist sword or claw-type weapons, build-up and finishing moves, the theme of an unavoidable, or at least far more precise finisher, maintaining the offensive without losing any stacks. All of that is one way or another courtesy of Diablo 2. As I was playing D2R last summer, I realized that Underrail swords were thematically somewhat reminiscent of a martial arts assassin running dual mosaic, as the playstyle of each relies on gaining momentum and sustaining it by relentless aggression. The main difference of course being that swords can flop at any moment and are nowhere near Mosaic Synth's power level. As Underrail swords are all about devastating but easily wasted momentum, Dragon Talons, whose core identity is ultimately that of a sword, are far less likely to fall flat due to their mixed ancestry, as well as relatively more diverse when it comes to application compared to the usual trade of sword and fist fighting. The matters of balance for this design are admittedly rather nebulous. Dragon Talons have gone through one iteration too many in my head, so I can't really tell anymore if they are too weak or too strong, too complex or too simple, or kind of boring, or whatever else. To me they seem alright, let's leave it at that. Initially I was planning to stick with Diablo 2's theme of building up stacks to be released all at once in a finishing move, until I realized that it might promote mindless spam of whichever ability is the strongest, regardless of situation. My intent, on the contrary, was to promote extended combos and dynamic adaptation, same as what I was proposing for unarmed combat. For that reason, special properties of restored abilities only increase in potency depending on combo length, as opposed to how many hits of the same ability have been landed. In the end, these properties became overall combo modifiers of sorts, in the sense that each restored ability brings a bit of its unique identity into the whole mix, like mutant blobs and red hound droppings being tossed into barrel soup.
Yeah, boy.
At any rate, several more things that I forgot to mention. The combo has to involve at least 2 restored attacks to enable finishing moves, putting 2-piece combos off the table. Damage range is set to upper limit for all finishing moves. Kicks and such can be used in the combo alongside restored abilities, even as finishers. Diablo 2 Assassin does almost always finish combos with kicks, but coming up with unique synergies between kicks and wrist swords seems a bit too much of an undertaking right now. Also a little something about riposte. In Underrail, although riposte may be activated through a separate ability, it is ultimately just a basic sword swing with bonus precision. For Dragon Talons, which are all about utilizing their special abilities within a combo, a random basic attack would more often than not be like tossing a wrench into a working mechanism.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
Free though it may be, what use is a basic attack when I only ever want to choose between special abilities? The solution I devised is for the riposte buff to offer a choice between a free basic attack and a 50% base AP reduction for any sword attack, including restored abilities. Even though I may be introducing this feature to promote the unique playstyle of Dragon Talons, and one more unique sword I'll be showing later, broadly speaking, I could see it being applicable to all swords and sword abilities in general. That is if riposte in its present form is even going to make it into Infusion, which I wouldn't bet my bespoke shoes on. Well, enough baseless speculation for now. I'll put Dragon Talons and all their special abilities on the screen one last time before moving on. Now, actually, let's briefly discuss a certain melee weapon refurbishment idea I had a while ago, namely the Armsmaster, an NPC who could teach the player how to wield this or that unique melee weapon more effectively. For melee weapons, I find improving one's skill with them to be a much more interesting prospect than a plain boost in base stats, as in theory, that should empower the traits that make unique weapons unique to begin with. To elaborate, if it were possible to rip a unique melee weapon apart and reconstruct it with higher quality components, along with an electroshock generator or energy edge, or if a blacksmith NPC could do the same for you, that would likely do more harm than good to the unique's identity, if not render it irrelevant altogether. The alternative to this is the Armsmaster, a character that could be convinced to look at a unique melee weapon, and then give you some sort of assignment, the fulfilling of which would result in mastering the given weapon. These mastery quests would involve anything from hunting down a notorious gang leader, to defeating an arena fighter with a specific weapon or in a specific way, to procuring some rare or valuable item, to besting the Armsmaster in a dialogue-based duel by figuring out your best options and correctly predicting his. The tasks could be anything really, and interactions with him need not be limited to just quests. He might, for instance, for a modest fee, spill the whereabouts of a unique melee weapon you have yet to learn of, discuss some martial arts related topics, or share some obscure bits of lore. To show what mastery would mean for unique melee weapons, let's go over a couple of examples. Balor's hammer, once viable, yet presently disgraced, shunned, and profusely memed on by the community. Upon heeding the Armsmaster's cryptic hints, it dawns on your character that the best way to employ that chunk of metal would be to smash at the ground. While wielding Balor's hammer, any sledgehammer attack could be ground targeted, dealing the most damage in the impact tile, a bit less within one tile, and even less within two. This damage fully bypasses mechanical resistance, but can instead be mitigated with evasion. Conveniently, if any affected target sustains at least 10% of its max health as damage, it will be put off balance for 2 turns. It is no grand secret that strong as bullshit in Underrail either never misses, or enables such a number of attacks as to render missing inconsequential. Hammers are the biggest losers in that regard, as one neither gets to swing a lot, nor possesses the means to ensure the attack's landing. To counter that, the heaviest sledgehammer in the game turns into a point-blank grenade launcher. One cannot really miss when attacking the ground, affecting anyone in range with the resulting seismic tremors. And thanks to the unbalancing, no one would be able to avoid getting hurt either. The numbers are, as always, semi-arbitrary, just to outline the damage fall-off within range and stipulate the conditions for unbalancing. I'm also not sure if ground targeting should be a special ability or a general mode of all sledgehammer attacks. What I can tell for sure is that I'd very much like becoming a living seismic calamity with mastered Balor's hammer. But would it not make more sense for Quake, which already has the seismic theme, to receive ground targeting instead? It would. I have no argument to that, apart from the fact that Quake is already a strong unique hammer with a distinct identity, and hardly warrants any more buffs. Balor's hammer, on the other hand, might as well be considered an oddity at this point. For another example, let's take the glaive. The glaive's main gimmick is to promote a sort of a fancy ceremonial dance of sweeping and fending. Base damage, however, is abysmal. The stacking buff is insignificant. The dancer runs out of breath very quickly, and only gets to perform every other turn at best. The Armsmaster's answer would be to work on these 3 weaknesses by introducing the following elements to the deadly performance. It's quite a lot, so I won't go over each minutest detail here, but the gist of it is to provide the glaive with AP mechanics and stronger cooldown modification through the sweep-fend pipeline, with one feeding into the other, based not only on use, but also on the number of targets hit and killing blows. With these additions, belly spinning with the glaive should become more sustainable and as a result deadlier, even without any direct changes to its horrendous base damage. The glaive would not become busted with these tweaks, but would still attain a unique spin-to-win playstyle that could not be replicated by any other spear, including the current glaive, as it is way too underpowered. I'd say these 2 examples are sufficient. I will add that mastering unique melee weapons with the Armsmaster's help is supposed to be a sort of a quest line, the reward for completing which would be the right to challenge him, or more like an obligation, unless you can talk your way out of it. Victory would then grant you his signature weapon, dual sickle swords. Alternatively, if your character is deemed worthy right away, you may skip the foreplay to propose a duel immediately, or you could just kill him dishonorably, without consent, in which case dual sickle swords would be obtained as an oddity rather than a weapon. A cutthroat avenue for characters that have no interest in mastering or melee weapons in general. Back to the video's main topic, I have the ultimate strength sword for you, the Great Sword. High base damage, extended range, and massive strength scaling all appear to scream spear rather than sword. Then there is Greater Guard, a strength-dependent version of Spear Guard, unique to Great Sword, parry scaling with strength rather than dexterity, and the restriction of flurry to top it all off. Although superficially a polearm, Great Sword is not intended to be a hybrid weapon like Dragon Talons. At heart it is still very much a sword, hence the absence of any interaction with spear-related feats. Critical damage bonus is respectable even for a sword, while Onslaught can potentially stack extremely fast, fueling momentum not with the number of attacks, but with the number of targets hit, as enabled by Greatsword's special ability, Unbridled Swing. This ability is pretty much a sweep, limited to 180 degrees in front of your character, minus the unbalancing. Slaying enemies with a swing has the potential to unleash more than 2 swings in a turn, thanks to the conditional AP discount. Hit hard, not fast, is Greatsword's unapologetic motto. The design is so straightforward that I honestly can't find much else to divulge about it, besides a somewhat contrived explanation on what killing someone on a wide swing has to do with AP reduction. Basically, as Greatsword cuts into a body, it resists the impact, soaking the swing's momentum and forcing the wielder to spend time and energy to get into the right stance for the next swing. If a swing hits nothing but air, the immense generated power meets no resistance, resulting in a massive overswing, which once again forces the wielder to spend extra time and energy in preparation for the next swing. It could even be in flavor for the wielder to lose balance upon failing to hit anything with unbridled swing, serving as a drawback for lacking either the skill or the strategic aptitude required to handle Greatsword's might. Finally, driving the blade cleanly through one's body, as implied by the target's immediate death, would allegedly absorb just enough momentum for Greatsword to avoid stopping prematurely or being overswung, ending up instead in perfect position to swing once more, as signified by the AP reduction on the next unbridled swing that turn. One may ask, how exactly is cleaving through multiple targets supposed to be more effective at managing momentum than cleaving through just one? To this I say, gameplay convention. Or you could think that the might required to swing the Greatsword is so inconceivable that running it through as many targets as possible is the only way to rein in the power generated. The main point is flavor, as is almost always the case with whatever my imagination spews out, and I find such conditional AP management very much in spirit of the sword's identity. In the end, despite similarities, Greatsword is a sword through and through, as previously asserted. Have any of you recognized Netmite's Zweihander design, by the way? It hasn't changed all that much since, truth be told, which could only mean that it was without flaw to begin with. One more thing I'd like to point out is that melee block with Greatsword still demands a bit of dexterity, if only to meet the parry's requirement. I deliberately kept Greater Guard distinct from Spear Guard, which requires no feats to activate. One could get by being a strong oaf with a pointy stick, but swordsmanship is always about finesse. Historically speaking, Greatswords weren't as unwieldy as one might think, so even though flurry may be restricted, riposte, also dex related, is still very much on the menu. Gaze upon Greatsword's unrestrained might once more, pointing out in the meantime that I have, once again, stolen the icon for it from Diablo 2. It's got great art style when it comes to gear. Sure beats whatever I could draw. Before introducing the final sword, I'd like to rank all designs featured in this video according to complexity, referring to how easy it is to figure out the weapon's intended use, how easy it is to apply in practice, as well as overall design intricacy. Dual Sickle Swords, 1 out of 10. Greatsword, 2 out of 10. Dragon Talons, 3 out of 10. Infused Dual Sickle Swords, 4 out of 10. Final Mystery Sword, 10 out of 10. The message should be clear. Only the ones most conditioned to my autism, the ones who have beheld each and every unique design, will be able to endure stepping into the chamber, where one shall be exposed to all that comprises the final sword's sprawling design. You've made your choice, and thus you are inside. So very, very close to me, which begs the question, why are you still hearing me over the intercom? My dear viewer, I regret to inform you that the operation didn't go as planned. Unfortunately, I will not be making it. What you're listening to is but a recording I've just barely had enough time to finish. Consider the following custom design a parting gift to the world. At first glance, it may appear rather ordinary, featuring only 3 somewhat unusual properties, such as the way to raise maximum riposte count with dexterity. The on-hit effect, called Perfect Poise, incrementally reduces action points of fencing sword abilities, which replace the generic sword kit as long as armor penalty is kept low and dex requirement is met. After landing any one of these abilities, the wielder assumes one of the 6 corresponding stances, while missing removes whatever stance the fencer may be in. Each stance provides its own special effects while active, and disregarding one stance of the 6, each of the remaining 5 uniquely improves 2 of the fencing attacks used to enter other stances. Doesn't sound too complicated yet? Give it some time. Let's start with the obvious. What's up with French? Because this design is an autistic ripoff of Duelist from Darkest Dungeon 2, who, for some reason, appears to be French. Let me assure you that I will only occasionally utter words in this blasphemous tongue of barbarous fiends, substituting most names with the closest equivalent in the godforsaken lingo of a tribe even more abominable. Darkest Dungeon's Duelist only has 2 stances, which I looked at one day and thought, how about 3 times as many? And just like that, the following dozen of malformed, ghoulishly intertwined Siamese twins were born. By themselves, most fencing abilities are pretty normal. Fléché is a deadly but costly piercing attack. Feint is just a setup move. Touché and Flick are just kind of there. False Edge starts off at a major disadvantage, shedding it gradually as the fight goes on. And Guillotine. We will get to Guillotine someday. As fencing sword's complexity lies entirely with the stances, let's go over all of them by engaging in a pretend fencing duel. Our first attack is Touché, leading to an offense-oriented Daredevil stance. As conveyed by the spectacular artwork, masterfully executed by yours truly, Daredevil is a taunting stance, a mocking display of vulnerability in exchange for a minor crit rate boost. The stance's negative effects may be mitigated by the number of carved up stacks on the attacker, even turning into a corresponding buff beyond a certain point. In the fencing context, the number of carved up stacks is supposed to represent the combined impact of all fencing maneuvers previously inflicted on the target in the ongoing duel, and all stances, as well as some abilities, take their own unique advantage of this indirect indicator of how each duelist has been faring in the engagement. As fencing swords carving up is sort of its own thing, I will be distinguishing it with a different color. In addition to unique carved up effects, each stance provides its own benefits in the event of perfect parry. In Daredevil, a perfect parry debuffs the attacker for a short while with the stance's negative effects, at 2% for each carved up stack, pulling a full reversal on the opponent by projecting the perceived disadvantage of the stance onto the one foolishly attempting to take advantage of it. Fencing abilities promoted by Daredevil are Flick and Feint, the common theme being accelerated onslaught and carved up stacking. Feint grants a stack of onslaught for each carved up stack on the target, including the 2 stacks that Feint applies by default. Flick applies and grants a bonus stack of either effect, plus 1 more on a critical hit for the total of 3 each in such an event. Lastly, as Flick and Feint both have lower than average damage, Daredevil improves it just a little. We press on with Flick, switching from Daredevil to Orthodox, a strictly defensive stance with perks tied to parry and riposte. The more carved up the attacker is, the more effective damage block. The more riposte stacks, the more damage dealt on riposte, for the purpose of collecting which Orthodox increases maximum number of riposte stacks by 2. Perfect parry in Orthodox removes any unbalancing effects, signifying a poised and controlled defense. Orthodox favors Fléché and Touché, the most violent fencing abilities, symbolizing a sharp and unpredictable switch from conservative defensive tactics to sudden offensive action. Daredevil, an outwardly aggressive stance, is similarly linked to a defense-related move and one meant to confuse and misdirect. You will see this motif of subverting expectation in just about all stances and fencing abilities. As far as particular effects are concerned, Flechet grants 1 AP on a hit that lands and deals damage in riposte, with each riposte stack doubling the bonus. Flechet has no precision penalty, costs less AP, and penetrates more resistance for each riposte stack, as well as doesn't unbalance if used in riposte. Remember the micro rant about riposte's additional action point functionality? Fencing Sword is what convinced me to add this option, for otherwise, all these cool on-riposte effects, as well as various means of AP reduction, would be completely wasted on fencing abilities. So, where were we? Right, Orthodox stance, from which we opt for Flechet, putting us in Le Mans, the stance of the dead, the second most precarious stance to be in. The disadvantages of Le Mans stem from the danger that comes with the associated fencing ability, as Flechet is a As Flechet is a reckless forward lunge, an all-out assault that could end up as fatal for the one delivering as it is for the one receiving. Such wild swings in the flow of battle are the very essence of Le Mans. In this stance, avoiding an attack is harder, parry is more likely to occur but blocks far less, and overall damage taken is also increased. In return, critical damage bonus is improved, getting further boosted after perfect parry, while the increase to damage taken is dependent on how carved up the attacker is, possibly resulting in taking slightly reduced damage. Akin to Daredevil, Le Mans is an overt provocation of a stance, a gamble of feigning near-death condition, only to pull off an effortless recovery or outright slay the overconfident opponent. The abilities favored by Le Mans are the ones linked to such recovery maneuvers: Feint and False Edge. Feint grants 2 AP when used in riposte, and reduces cooldown of all fencing abilities by 1 turn, including Feint. False Edge is more impactful in comparison, restoring a large chunk of the ability's base AP, and also reducing cooldown of all fencing abilities by 1 turn, excluding False Edge. False Edge typically refers to the sharpened area in the back of a single-edged weapon, but in this context, False Edge is more of a metaphor for an attack that comes from a seemingly impossible position or angle, so that the target can't even imagine there being an edge to cut with. To avoid lingering on death's door any longer, our next choice is Feint, leading to the Morihil stance. Here is an important question: do you find the artwork for the stance creepy or goofy? I was aiming for more of an unnerving feel, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it didn't quite work out. To understand the concept of the stance, picture an agitated Morihil, coiling and thrashing about wildly and unpredictably, all of a sudden lashing out in a devastating lunge. Passively, Morihil is an elusive stance, growing ever harder to hit depending on riposte and carved up stacks. Perfect parry further contributes to the slippery agenda, by doubling the miss chance from carved up stacks. The ultimate payoff, besides taking less damage, is that dodging a melee attack in Mori stance grants a riposte stack, and so does evading a ranged attack, provided that the evasive action takes place at point-blank range. Actively, Mori is a feral stance, preying on the wounded with empowered Flechet and False Edge. Wounds are in this case represented through the number of carved-up stacks, upon which Flechet feeds with increased critical damage and precision, each further increased with the number of riposte stacks. Moreover, a killing blow prevents Flechet's biggest drawback, being put off balance afterwards. The capacity to swallow any prey whole is what any self-respecting Morihil ought to aspire to. False Edge costs even less AP than it normally would, conditionally corners prey, and digs deep into its exposed viscera by doubling the critical rate modifier of carved up stacks. Do note that the ability used to enter the Mori stance is Feint, which promotes carving up regardless of stance, as though dicing the prey to bits before feeding frenzy. Continuing with the mock fight, we select False Edge, entering the stance whose artwork speaks for itself, as superior is a stance for asserting dominance. The stance's main strength, besides bonus precision, lies in staying out of filthy commoners' league by disregarding their existence in every conceivable way. First is the guaranteed parry for the next incoming melee, with considerably enhanced block value. Perfect parry refreshes the effect, potentially leading to a feedback loop of perfect parry instances. Second is the AP penalty for attacking one of superior standing, at 5% for each carved up stack. Coupled with base AP loss from being carved up, some enemies might be left with no offensive options at all. Third concerns special effects of Chained Flick. The two simplest fencing abilities, as dealing with uncouth peasants warrants no elaborate means. Touché cannot be blocked, does not expend a stack of riposte on hit, and on kill, reduces all fencing sword cooldowns by 1 turn. Flick derives extra precision from carved up stacks, puts the target off balance on riposte, and does not spend riposte on kill, as though the act of killing was so trivial it took not even an ounce of effort to achieve. Bullying common filth and all that, you get the idea. Alright, stop, it's getting old. By now we have exhausted nearly all novel options in the stance dancing simulation, leaving us with no choice but to culminate the spectacle with guillotine. Guillotine requires being in any stance to use, at a glance presenting but an inferior version of decapitate. Failing to kill a target with guillotine removes the current stance, while succeeding transforms you into the Grim Reaper. Enter the Executioner stance. The Executioner cannot be overridden by any other stance, effectively disabling them all for the duration. Killing blows refresh the stance, as well as escalate the plethora of effects it comes with, up to 5 times. Most of these modifiers have very severe drawbacks, signifying, once fully stacked, an act of converting one's very life into the power to take any life. That said, both outgoing damage buffs are indirect, bound as they are to Onslaught, which serves as a strict break on the Executioner's killing potency. You should have noticed a while ago that Fencing Sword's capabilities are circumstantial to a fault, which is something I will be addressing eventually. For now, I will clarify that Onslaught's damage increase is effectively doubled for each stack of the Executioner. To demonstrate, single stack damage goes from 5% to 30, bumping fully stacked Onslaught from 100 to 600% increase, alongside which the multiplicative critical damage bonus grows from 20 to 100%. I'm not sure if you too see it that way, but to me these bonuses appear gargantuan, hence why they are so unlikely to ever be enjoyed in full in the uncertainty of Underreality. The artwork alone should be able to convey the theme, with Grim Reaper's scythe vaguely resembling a guillotine blade about to descend on a victim's neck, yet always ready to just as easily behead the one holding it, which is why failure to execute in a single hit raises the blade above the Reaper's head instead, removing positive effects of the Executioner but retaining all negative ones for as long as guillotine remains on cooldown, which may take up to 30 turns. Enjoy. Take this time to reflect on the crushing burden of your sins as it bends your neck under the looming blade. Let's call this substance the death row. Just as the Executioner, no other stance may replace it, not until guillotine is off cooldown or the fight is over. Thanks to the Executioner's property of reducing all fencing cooldowns by 1 turn on kill, near instant bailout from the death row is still more or less a possibility after a bountiful harvest. So as long as you are exceptionally good at committing atrocities, you might not have to face the consequences. The flavor and intended designation of the Executioner in the fencing kit should be obvious. The Executioner is an antithesis to stance dancing, an approach to death dealing stripped down to the simplicity of a coin toss. No fancy maneuvers, tactical choices, long-term planning, or complex equations may affect the outcome anymore. You live, you die. Call it. And this wraps up the general description of all that Fencing Sword is capable of, indicating that it's time to put the tinfoil hat on and start rambling about the fine print. Is what I wish I could say, but the lights above the operating table are quickly growing dimmer in my eyes. I fear my time is... Oh, I wonder if that was my... I guess it doesn't matter anymore. In the description, there should be a document containing the rest of what I wish to say about the design of Fencing Sword. Go there if you're interested, while I set out on a journey from which none return. Thank you for watching, and for being with me in my final moments. Farewell.